In the late 18th century, a coalition of Dutch and French forces were to face British and Russian soldiers in Bergen op Zoom after the Duke of York had landed in North Holland. Part of the French army came across a detachment of British soldiers as they were heading to meet their allies at Langendijk. At a small farm village, a skirmish broke out between the two factions. The open fields were chosen as their stage, but both the French and the English knew that an infantry battle here would be exhausting, as the inaccurate weapons would make it a long-lasting onslaught. Both armies took turns firing on one another, chipping away casualties only a handful at a time. The French had some artillery to their disposal, which gave them a small advantage, but the longer British line meant that only the front soldiers got the worst of it. The map showed a nearby small island which could be used to flank both armies. Whoever controlled this island had a considerable advantage over the other, and it was no surprise that both the French and British dispatched groups to seize the island and flank the enemy. Back at the field, screams of wounded soldiers echoed over the loud shots from the muskets. Blood-drenched soldiers reloaded their weapons frantically, as many of their friends drew their last breath. At the island, both dispatched groups had crossed the bridge, but the British were slightly faster and secured the only hut on the island to set up defensive positions. A fight between the two groups unfolded as well. Both sides took casualties as the fighting distance was closer compared to the field. The French lacked cover, but the inaccuracy of the weaponry had most of them not worried. At the field, the battle dragged on, as the lines started to show gaps of wounded and dead infantry. Infantry on both sides seemed to hold out on the island, however. Some of the British had set up position in the hut, but this meant that the infantry deployed outside had lesser numbers, making them less effective in the process. The French did not care about the enemy having secured the hut. To them, it meant that they were boxed in and had nowhere to run. In their eyes, that hut would become their tomb. As the Brits who were outside lost more and more men, many took shelter behind logs or carts. On the nearby field, the battle seemingly refused to come any closer to an end as was expected. A rinse and repeat of firing, reloading, and firing again, accompanied by the screams of the dying. Things were finally taking a turn on the island as the British had lost many men over the course of the battle and were pinned down by the French. In their panicked and terrified state, the remaining Brits were barely able to do any damage. Some of the soldiers fled, while others hid to reload or considered even surrendering. The French were moving in fast, as a trail of blood as red as the enemy's coats was spread across the ground. The soldiers in the hut had now regretted their decision, as they came to realize that the only way out was through the front door, right into the bayonets of the French. Thus, they refused to leave, and the French muskets were not strong enough to penetrate the wood. But the French had just the right equipment to deal with a problem like that. As meaningless firing exchanged between opposing infantry outside and inside the hut, the French cannon was rolled into position to blow up the building and killing everyone inside. With the last held defense out of the way, more Brits decided to flee, as only the most valiant stayed behind to fight, to no avail, as they were brutally killed without any remorse. With the island in French hands, flanking maneuvers on the main army at the field could go underway. Back at the field, nothing had changed, as it was an all too familiar sight, but unknowing to the Brits, they were being approached from the rear as well. Once close enough, the flanking infantry opened fire, confusing the British as some of them changed firing direction. Most were still focused on the French main army, as they got shot from multiple directions through the thick smoke. Though the French who attacked from the rear took casualties as well, they were able to deal devastating damage as the cannon fire and the main army did the rest. The Brits tried one final push as the remaining force still fired, but panic and confusion meant it was for naught. They had lost too many troops and endured too many wounded. Soon the Brits surrendered as France claimed its victory and continued to march to reinforce the Dutch at Langendijk.